everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode on CIRA International. Today we are going to continue our argument against the Quranic verse that denies the crucifixion of Christ. And as we talked about this verse in the previous episodes, specifically, of course, the main verse in chapter 4, verse 157, we exposed a number of flaws in the Quranic argument. And today I want to continue, of course, with this explanation why this particular verse in the Quran, the only verse, if I may add, cannot really stand in the face of all the evidence that we have, not only in the Bible itself, but even external evidence outside the Bible. Example of that, for instance, the empty tomb. We have yet to find a tomb, a grave where Jesus is buried. And we have yet to find any writings by non-Christians that denied this event. Now, if some of them denied it, but they were silent about it, that doesn't prove anything, because the ones who wrote about Jesus many times made reference to not only his life and his ministry, but also his crucifixion and some even his resurrection. Not to mention, of course, the eyewitness account of many people that witnessed, of course, what happened to him, and later on ended up being persecuted for their faith, denied, basically recanted their faith, and were willing to even go all the way to die for their faith. Why would they do this if the resurrection of Christ wasn't true? Even the appearance of Christ to those that were around him is significant, because if he would have appeared to people that never really been around him, they didn't know anything about him, or they even met him once or twice, that won't be significant, because people can say, well, you weren't around him at all, you've never witnessed what he did, you've never even went through his trial, you've never witnessed that he was on the cross. So it was very significant that Jesus always appeared to those that were around him, were familiar with him, familiar with his ministry, and most importantly, even witnessed his crucifixion. So it's really hard to take all of these evidence and the logic also behind them and just say that Jesus wasn't crucified simply because the Quran in one verse only stated so. And if we look at the Quranic verse in chapter 4, verse 157, that stated that they did not kill him nor crucify him, we also have a problem here. Just the order that the Quran is listing what happened to Jesus is wrong. By saying they did not kill him nor crucify him, it goes against how crucifixion works. Crucifixion does not work by killing someone and then hanging them on a cross. This is what Sharia law punishment is like. When you kill someone or behead someone, then they hang them on a cross for display. You see, there is an Islamic thinking in here, but that's not how crucifixion works. Crucifixion actually is quite the opposite. They put the person on a cross, and usually it takes the person maybe 2 to 3 days before they die. That's why everybody was even surprised that Jesus died so quickly, within almost 6 hours, because that's normally, that doesn't take place. And this is the reason why they punctured his side, and that's where we read basically in the Bible that water and blood basically gushed out from his side. There's a reason why they did that, to ensure basically that he was dead indeed. Another problem, of course, with the Quranic denial. The idea that God, the God of Islam, would allow such a thing to take place is taking place in terms of ascending Jesus and rescuing him from completing his mission, because he was going to be captured, according to the Islamic commentators, was going to be killed, yet God stepped in and took him basically to heaven, is actually a problem, because simply the Quran actually is acknowledging that the God of Islam couldn't basically rescue Jesus any other way. That the God of Islam actually was willing to cut his mission short of completion. So really, if there is a failure here, it's not on Jesus, it is on the God of Islam. He's the one who failed to get his message across, to make sure that it was fulfilled. here's another problem also. If indeed the crucifixion never took place, then why did the God of Islam wait 600 years to finally expose the idea that the crucifixion never happened? So what about the innocent Christians who lived for 600 years, who believed in it, who died in it, and who were convinced that Jesus did die on the cross and was raised again from the dead for their justification? Where is the mercy of God in here? So there is another attack, of course, against the character of the God of Islam. So my hope is that my Muslim people think through these arguments and not just casually throwing arguments left and right, when in fact you are even attacking your own God and His weakness, His inability to fulfill His purposes, and most importantly, His deception against those who followed Christ. It is really interesting to point out that after verse 157, in verse 158, the God of Islam actually brags that he was a master deceiver. So that too is another problem. How can God, who is holy and just, brag about the fact that he was also a deceptive God? In other words, if he was a God who deceived Christians or even Jews to believe that Jesus basically either was crucified or wasn't crucified, depending on which group, of course, we're talking about here, because the Christians believed he was crucified, the Jews bragged about killing him, and the God of Islam is saying they did not kill him, then we have a problem here, actually. Because then the God of Islam actually cannot be trusted even among Muslims. Because if he told you this, why would you believe him, knowing that he's already declared to you that he has already deceived two groups before you? He deceived the Christians and he deceived the Jews, and now he could be deceiving you. Let me ask also another question. Why did the Quran invest the time to even talk about the crucifixion? If it didn't happen, why even bother to talk about it? Why did the Quran actually not refer the Jews to the Christians? If indeed Jesus wasn't crucified, the Quran could have said, go and ask the Nazarene that Jesus wasn't crucified. Why did the Quran, for instance, basically chose to talk about the ascension of Christ? You know why? Because the Quran knew, or the author of the Quran knew, there is no empty tomb for Jesus. There is no grave to point people to. And the easy thing to say is he ascended. So the Quran technically acknowledges at least the ascension of Christ, which took place after the resurrection. So indirectly, the Quran is already agreeing with some of the facts and some of the steps that took place after the resurrection and after, of course, the crucifixion of Christ. So all of these questions are very important for us to ponder through and to wonder, why would the Quran be silent about important facts as this? Furthermore, our Muslim friends, of course, are immediately quick to blame Paul for the idea that Jesus was crucified and that he died, that he was buried, that he rose again, and then he ascended. Somehow it's Paul who basically overpowered the God of Islam, and technically speaking, the message of Paul amazingly have survived for 2,000 years. I mean, that's really requires more faith, actually, than the faith that the Quran is asking us to believe in, that Jesus was never crucified. Because in order for this message to survive for 2,000 years with Christians living and dying, believing in this message, including the amazing transformation of Paul himself, who himself acknowledged that he was a persecutor of the church, and all of a sudden, he himself became a preacher for Jesus, and all of a sudden, he himself got imprisoned many times and got persecuted many times, and then lost his life as a result of this message. I mean, what kind of a deceptive person was Paul, to the point that he's willing to even to die for his deception? It doesn't make any sense. What about the other apostles that suffered on account of the fact that they preached the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection, and the ascension of Christ? Not a single one of them ever wised up and says, you know what, forget it. Doesn't worth it. I admit I lied, or I admit they lied, or even just escape and never bother at all. Why would they go through the whole process of even suffering and dying, or being in prison, or being sent into exile, and some of them died really horrible death. It doesn't make any sense unless they have faith in the fact that this had happened. Because those kind of events not only prove faith, but they prove the faithfulness of the person. That's why the believers were willing to suffer, because they knew fully that Jesus did indeed die and rose again for their justification, and he died for the forgiveness of their sin. So once again, we need to really ponder all of these things. But now let's examine this claim that it was Paul. The Quran actually, in one of its chapters, as you can see it right now, in chapter 64, verse 14, said the following: O you who believe, be ye helpers of Allah, as said Jesus, the son of Mary, to his disciples, who will be my helpers, or helpers of Allah. Said the disciples, we are Allah's helpers. Then a portion of the children of Israel believed, and a portion disbelieved. Notice what the Quran is saying. Two groups emerged as far as the followers of Jesus are concerned. Some of the Jews believed in Christ, and of course they are called Christians or Nazarenes, and others denied Christ. But look what happened to those who believed. But we, this is the God of Islam speaking, we gave power to those who believed against those or their enemies. And what happened? And they became the ones that prevailed. That's amazing. The Quran basically admits that those who believed in Christ prevailed over the ones that did not believe. It didn't say that they ran for their life. It didn't say that they disappeared. It did not say that they basically were vindicated and that's it. No, they prevailed. In fact, in chapter 3, verse 55, it says that they prevailed basically and became superior until when? Until the day of resurrection. If you truly put these two passages together, 3:55 and 64:14, you know now that they prevailed not for a short period of time until the day of resurrection. And as I mentioned before, here is newsflash: we are not living in a day of resurrection yet. It is not there yet. And the message of Paul, if I want to take this argument seriously, is still the same message that have survived and continue to survive. But it is not Paul's message. It's Christ's message. He's the one who sent him to preach the exact same message that we read before in Luke chapter 24, verses 44 to 46. It was Jesus himself who says that the suffering that he went through is to fulfill what was written about him, and that we ought to go and preach basically that he died for the forgiveness of sin. So Paul was merely preaching exactly what the other apostles have preached, and we today believe in exactly what Jesus himself asked the apostles to preach. Don't you think like there'll be one single discovery at least that can deny this gospel? One writing that could have said that's not what Jesus preached? Sadly, there isn't a single thing that can deny this. Not even the Quran can even prove that the gospel is faulty. Yet we hear these arguments over and over and over again. And that's basically how it goes. And according, of course, to this passage, 64:14, Allah gave Christ's followers what? Gave them power. He didn't just give them anything. He gave them power. In fact, that's exactly what the Bible teaches. Jesus promised his disciples and promised his followers that they will receive power from above. Acts 1:8, for instance. Luke 24, verses 44 until the end of that chapter, which is the last chapter, promised that they will receive power from above, and they will be his witnesses. Where? In Jerusalem, all of Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Notice? And then Jesus also in the Great Commission says, and I will be with you until the end of the age. Not just for a period of time, until the end basically comes. Jesus says in Matthew 24, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached as a testimony to all nations, then the end will come. Notice the time? The end time. Didn't say until somebody else comes in. He did warn, by the way, that others will come in after him, but those he described them to be false prophets and false messiahs. And he also warned his followers to watch out for them. And the Bible teaches us to test the spirit And of course, we can test the Spirit according to the Word of God. Now, Sam Shamoun, many of you probably are familiar with, who is a writer for answering-islam.org, in one of his articles, and this article specifically was titled, "The Quran Affirms Paul Passed On the True Gospel of Christ," makes a compelling argument why Muslims should really stop from using the excuse that Paul actually is the one who invented this gospel. And I'm going to show you why. Because he quoted a number of Muslim scholars. For instance, one of those scholars, his name is Mu'izz Amjad, in his commentary on chapter 3, verse 55, where the Quran says that God basically made the followers of Jesus superior and until the day of resurrection, he said the following in his commentary. He says, "This verse relates to the law relating to the messengers of God as a punishment on the rejectors of Jesus. The Quran has mentioned that at the time of the decision that God made relating to termination of Jesus' message, God declared that after him, those who believed in Jesus will dominate those who rejected him, i.e., he said the Jews." That's interesting, because now he's going to tell you who are those who dominated. Till the day of judgment, he says. Notice, the day of judgment. In the referred verse, those who believed in Jesus are referenced as Christians. Notice the difference now? You have Jews who rejected, remains Jews, and those who followed Jesus, now they have a new name, Christians. In other words, they're the followers of Christ. Shamoun also continues by quoting another scholar. This time, the scholar that he's quoting, his name is Maulana Ali, and he writes regarding the same passage, 3 verse 55, chapter 3 verse 55, Maulana Ali says this verse contains 4 promises relating to Jesus' triumph over his enemies as against their plans. And the 4th promise, he says, he listed 4 promises. The 4th one I'm going to focus on is that those who follow Jesus shall be made dominant. Yet again, we read the same word. Over who? Over his rejectors till the day of judgment. Once again, the truth of this 4th prophecy is witness to this day in the dominance of the Christians over the Jews. That's very interesting. Even he noticed that. So my question is, why do Muslims keep denying these things? In fact, if you want to go and inspect this, you can go to the source where we got it from. It's basically called Ali, Holy Quran. That's Abdullah Yusuf Ali, basically. I should say Maulana Ali, Holy Quran, and it's Ahmadiyya reference, and Islam Lahore Incorporated, USA, 1995. You can check basically pages 147 to 148. But just in case, and this is, by the way, from footnote 439, just in case someone might say, well, this is just an Ahmadiyya source. That's fine. We anticipated this. So let's take a look at another guy who's not an Ahmadiyya. His name is Abdullah Yusuf Ali, one of the Quranic translators. You can, of course, get a hold of his copy. It's called Abdullah Yusuf Ali, in his translation called the Holy Quran Text and Commentary, page 1543, footnote number 5448. Again, the page is 1543, footnote 5448. This is what Abdullah Yusuf Ali says. On the other hand, he says, those who followed Jesus permeated the Roman Empire, brought many new races within their circle. Notice he said they expanded the message. They did not retreat. They actually expanded the entire Roman Empire. And we're not talking a small empire at that time. And through the Roman Empire, Christianity became the predominant religion of the world. But in his case, he's claiming that took place only until the advent of Islam. So Abdullah Yusuf Ali actually is denying what the Quran is saying, because the Quran says actually until the day of resurrection. But I'm not really surprised, because he's of course also deceived to believe that that's what is meant by the day of resurrection, which means the day Islam appears. If Abdullah Yusuf Ali thinks that the day of judgment is Islam, then he's right about that, because Islam does judge others by killing them and terrorizing them. Maybe that's what he meant. And then, here's what we read also. Yusuf Ali, in accusing Allah of failing to keep his promise, therefore, he is actually making Allah to look like a liar, because the Quran actually says that until the day of resurrection, which is yet to come. Here's another Islamic scholar, Maulana Abdul Majid. And Maulana Abdul Majid basically commenting on this particular verse, chapter 64, verse 14, this is what he says. And neither the messenger nor the message could be destroyed. In other words, neither Jesus or his gospel can be destroyed. What is his source? The source is Tafsir al-Quran, translation and commentary of the Holy Quran. You can go, of course, and find that as well. It's volume number 4, the 1991 edition, page 356, footnote number 270. Here is again another thing that we have to pay attention to. If Pauline Christianity is a corruption of Jesus' true teaching, then the message technically was destroyed, and therefore the God of Islam failed to protect the message. Plain and simple. If my Muslim friends are willing to go along with that, then they are accusing the God of Islam of failure. That's basically what it boils down to. And here is one very important thing that we have to now pay attention to. Al-Qurtubi, who basically wrote his commentary almost 300 years after the time of the Prophet and wrote around the 10th century, this is what he says. Notice, 300 years after the time of the Prophet, in other words, that was 900 years after the time of Jesus. This is what he says about this passage, which is 64:14. This is what he says. It was said that this verse, referring to 64:14, was revealed about the apostles of Jesus, may peace and blessings be upon him. Ibn Ishaq, who wrote the biography of Muhammad, stated that of the apostles and disciples that Jesus sent to preach were Peter and Paul, who went to Rome. That's really interesting, because Al-Qurtubi, 900 years after the time of Jesus, still write for us that it was Paul who went to Rome to preach the message of Jesus. So obviously the message of Paul, which is the message of Jesus, survived for 900 years until the time of Al-Qurtubi, and he had no problem reporting this to us. Expounding basically that in his expository commentary here, that the Quranic verse is talking about no others than the apostles of Jesus, listing them literally and including Paul to be one of those. My dear friends, my dear Muslim friends, you can see why making an argument that the crucifixion and the death and resurrection never took place is really an argument that backfires against your God, against his ability to basically protect his prophet and protect the message of prophet. It exposes his weaknesses, and also it exposes flaws in his character when he calls himself a master deceiver. So it's up to you. You either basically deceive yourself literally and believe in this one lonely passage, or examine all evidence that are available that supports the resurrection of Christ, and most importantly, of course, support the crucifixion of Christ as a historical event. Next time we meet, we will begin to expose the dilemmas that are found in this lonely Quranic verse, which is found in chapter 4, verse 157. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you will be notified of new videos.